A Quiet Place Day One is a movie about a couple of New Yorkers and a cat heading over to Harlem to get some pizza. Oh, and I guess there's some aliens or something like that? Let's talk about it. What's up, my dude? Your friendly neighborhood Tony here, and as I do with all my movie reviews, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about A Quiet Place Day One, who made it, what it's about, all that good stuff. Then I'll go into the things I did and did not like about the movie, the pros and cons. And finally, I'll let you know who I think A Quiet Place Day One is for, if anyone. If that kind of thing sounds cool to you and you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies coming out, make sure you subscribe. In A Quiet Place Day One, a woman named Sam finds herself trapped in New York City during the early stages of an invasion of alien creatures with ultrasonic hearing. Day One is the third movie in the Quiet Place franchise. It's actually a prequel to the other two, and like the other two, it's also an apocalyptic horror thriller. This one is written and directed by Michael Sarnoski. Now, you might not know his name. The only other big movie he worked on was a movie called Pig with Nicolas Cage. That came out a couple years ago and actually did really well. But I think as far as major blockbuster franchises, this is kind of his big break. Now, John Krasinski wrote on and directed the first two movies in the series, but he's kind of passing over the mantle to the new guy. This movie, like the other two Quiet Place movies, is rated PG-13 for terror, violent content, and bloody imagery. And it runs about an hour and 40 minutes. The first two were also around that same time, I think an hour 30 and an hour 37 respectively. So they're all kind of around the same length. And I feel like that's perfect for a movie like this. Not every movie needs to be 3 hours long. We can tell an hour and a half story and be perfectly fine with that. A Quiet Place Day One stars Lupita Nyong'o. She is Sam, the person I mentioned in the premise. Alongside her is Joseph Quinn, who I wasn't really familiar with. I know he was in Stranger Things, I think season 4, where he played Eddie Munson. And I think he's supposed to be in the upcoming Gladiator sequel. So he's kind of an up-and-comer. You also have Alex Wolff in this movie, as well as Djimon, who I absolutely love. He was in the second Quiet Place movie, and this one kind of shows how he got to where he was in that movie. So, okay, before we get into the pros and cons, let me tell you kind of my expectations going into this movie so that way you kind of know where I stood. So I'm a big fan of the first two movies. I didn't watch them when they first came out, though I actually watched them fairly recently, and I thought that they were phenomenal. I think the concept of the world and the alien creatures and the way that they interact with people is really interesting and unique. As with most alien invasion movies, there are going to be a lot of similarities drawn between this franchise and other classic franchises like Aliens, for example. But still, in order for a movie to be good, it doesn't necessarily have to be completely original. In fact, almost no movie is completely original. All in all, I would say I'm a big fan of the franchise, but sometimes it's better to leave well enough alone. And I feel like all too often we see franchises just run into the ground. So, does A Quiet Place Day One run the franchise into the ground, or does it open up a whole new world of possibilities? Well, let's start with the pros. And the first, and I think most obvious pro here, is that Lupita Nyong'o is an absolute legend of an actor. And personally, if I was in Joseph Quinn's shoes and I was told that I'm going to be starring alongside her in a movie like this, I'd be shook. But as you expect, she does a phenomenal job here in her character. She's just so good at expressing emotion with her face and her body language, which is exactly what you need in a movie like this, where your whole thing is you can't make a lot of noise or speak. So she is perfect. She is stunning in this movie. And Joseph Quinn, I mean, he does a pretty good job too. Like I said, it's difficult when you're kind of acting alongside a talent like Lupita, but I feel like he really held his own. Another pro about this is that you don't necessarily have to watch the prior two movies in order to kind of follow this one. Although if you do, you're definitely going to get a lot more out of it. There are all these different nods to the other movies, and it'll just kind of help you understand the stakes of what's going on. But if you just went into this with fresh eyes, if you had not seen any of the prior two, I think you're going to be totally fine. It kind of reminds me of an old thing that Stan Lee said. So if you don't know, Stan Lee is kind of the godfather of all the Marvel comics. And one thing that he said a long time ago was that every issue of a comic book is somebody's introduction to those characters. So yes, you want to be able to tell stories that are continuing on and building off of each other, but you also need to recognize that some people might just be tuning in for the first time with whatever story you're telling. And so I think they did a really good job here kind of covering all those bases, building off of something that came before it, but also giving you kind of a spot to be introduced into this whole world, into this franchise. I also really dig the concept of seeing what happened with these events from the perspective of New York City. You know, in the first two movies, I think we're in Connecticut, I want to say, in like a small town in Connecticut. And here we're in kind of the exact opposite of that, one of the biggest metropolitan areas in the world. And at the very beginning of the movie, they say something about the sound in New York when you're just walking around, the ambient noise is something like 90 decibels on average, which they say is the equivalent of someone just constantly screaming, which is kind of insane to think about. But what better place to tell the story of these alien monsters that operate off of detecting sound and doing so in a place where there's just constant sound. So I thought that was really clever. I thought that was really interesting. And I like how they use New York as a character, as like a main character in the movie. And when this movie starts off, right off the rip, they get you so invested in the characters and in the world and into everything that especially Lupita's character is dealing with. I feel like they really emotionally grab you right away, and just the whole way through you're connected with her. And a big part of that is Lupita and her acting, of course, but another big part of that is kind of the direction, right? It's the way that they shoot things, the cinematography, the way that they shoot the action, the sound design is also incredible, especially the sound design, whether it's kind of the sound effects and everything, the use of silence throughout the movie, or the loud moments, especially when you see this swarm of alien creatures moving through a major metropolitan area, and it feels like a stampede of elephants moving through an area. And so kind of blending that loud, powerful rumbling of sound energy with these silent, you can hear a pin drop moments, and the tension that comes from that, I feel like is so well done, especially in this movie. I think better than even in the first two. Speaking of sound, the music is also phenomenal. I feel like the way that they have these sweeping and swelling musical cues that really kind of just build up the emotion in you. A lot of times you can have music just kind of be in the background of a movie and it doesn't really do anything to you or for you as an audience. But in this situation, and in situations where music is used as a really helpful tool, it elicits emotion in you just from the sound of the music. Like whatever's happening on screen is a whole other thing, but just the sound of the music itself is able to stir up different feelings in you while you're watching the movie. And that is awesome. That is expert filmmaking right there. And again, speaking of the sound, so much of this movie, or throughout so much of this movie, the characters are not allowed to speak, right? You don't want to alert the alien creatures. And so because of that, they have to be able to communicate effectively without the use of words. And I feel like that's really cool because you hear about how much of human communication is nonverbal, but then when you watch a movie like this and you realize how easy it is to follow along with what everyone's trying to say or trying to express, it really kind of drives home that fact that so much of our communication is nonverbal. And so I feel like they did a really good job with that here. And again, that's partly the direction, partly the acting. It's also really cool to see, because this movie takes place in such a populated area and there are so many people around, even though there are only a couple of main characters in the movie, it's cool to see how all these other people react to these kind of crazy, stressful, and dangerous situations. It could be really easy for a movie to just paint everyone as fully capable and they totally have it together when, the crap hits the fan. But that's not always the case. In fact, that's rarely the case. Most people are going to either freeze completely, are going to run away and scream, or just melt down and lose it. And you get to see all of that in this movie, which I thought was really interesting. But at the same time, that does kind of lead me into some of my cons. So let's go ahead and get into that. But before we do, I want to let you know that this video is sponsored by you. That's right. I'm just an independent channel here without any big corporate sponsors or anything like that. So just by watching the video, you're really helping me out. If you want to be super dope and show your support in the easiest possible way, do me a solid and like the video, and maybe drop a comment down below. Let me know, what do you think about the Quiet Place franchise as a whole? And also, where do you think it can go from here? I feel like we've already seen a lot now, but what other spin-offs or sequels or prequels do you think that they can do? I think maybe not a movie, but what might be kind of cool is like a novel, like a military novel going over the way that the government and the militaries deal with the whole alien invasion. I think that would be kind of cool. But let me know what you think in the comments below. You can also now join as a channel member if you want to help support me financially, or just subscribe for free if you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies coming out. Either way, whatever you do, I appreciate it. All right, on to the cons. And kind of what I touched on previously, one of the things that did irritate me about this movie is how completely stupid some people were. And I get it, as I mentioned before, not everyone is going to react perfectly in these kinds of situations. Some people will just lose their minds and melt down and be screaming in the street. And I get that, and I appreciate that. And I think it's important to represent that. But it did feel at times that it was just a little bit too much, to where I found myself just irritated with some of the other characters. And although there is, I gotta be honest, a little bit of morbid satisfaction in seeing someone acting completely foolish and then getting just wrecked because of it, it does feel like a handicap, because in the first two movies, they do similar things where they have people make completely idiotic choices just to kind of move the plot forward in certain ways. And they definitely do that here. And it just felt like a crutch. Aside from that, as I mentioned in the intro, there is also a cat in this movie, and I love cats. Cats are amazing. And this cat is super cool throughout the movie, but also kind of annoying. The cat does things, and again, it's kind of like I mentioned about how people will just do really dumb things to move the plot forward. Well, they almost had like the excuse of the cat in this movie to just be like, well, the cat did this, so now we have to go figure that out. And I found that to be a bit annoying at times. You know, I don't know, look, I love my pets, but if this were to go down and we were being attacked by an alien force that reacts to sound, I'm gonna have to dip. I can't be there around my pet who might make a noise and get everybody killed. So I get it in the movie, and there were times when I did enjoy the cat character, but then there were also times where the cat just felt like, okay, what are we doing here? Aside from that though, the only other negative I have is, it's a little nitpick, but it's one of those things where when you see it, you can't unsee it. And that is that there is a scene where a certain character is submerged in water, right? They are head to toe soaked. And in the very next scene, they are bone dry, like hair dry, clothes dry, not a drop of water on them. And that next scene was not hours later or a day later or whatever. It was pretty soon after them being submerged in water. So again, that's a nitpick. It's not going to affect, I think, the quality of the movie at all. It's just one of those things that you would think that somewhere during the shooting process or even during the editing process, somebody would have noticed that and said, oh, hey, oops. I don't know. But that's really it. I mean, honestly, this movie is phenomenal. So who do I think A Quiet Place Day One is for? Well, honestly, this movie is truly terrifying, and I feel like it's probably better than the first two, although I'm sure not everyone would agree with me on that. It feels to me like they couldn't have passed the franchise on to anyone better suited for this kind of movie. So if you enjoyed the first two movies, I think you're absolutely going to enjoy this one. Or if you're just looking for a big action-packed blockbuster summer thriller movie that's made by a truly artistic writer and director and starring actors and actresses that are wildly talented, I think you're going to enjoy Day One. But of course, this is all just my thoughts, my opinions. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If A Quiet Place Day One sounds interesting to you, you can check it out in theaters this weekend. If you've seen it already, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And of course, if you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies coming out, make sure you subscribe. All right, my dude, I'll catch you in the next one. Be good.